Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Phoenix Books in beautiful downtown Burlington. Today was a beautiful, sort of springish day. Felt like spring today anyway after the long winter that we've had. We're here tonight with Baird Hersey, and he is the author of the book, The Practice of Naga Yoga. And tonight he's going to be talking about the book and singing and having us really focus on listening, which is the practice of Naga Yoga, practice of listening. Baird is a musician and a composer, and he's actually a composition fellow for the National Endowment for the Arts, which I think is pretty amazing. And also I think it's coming up on about 15 years since you founded Prana.
That's right.
Which is a 9-voice overtone choir. That's a good length of time for that. That's awesome. And without further ado, please welcome Baird Hersey.
Thank you and welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. So I always like to sort of get a feel for who's here. So people who do yoga, yogis, any yogis? Oh yes. Oh yes. Musicians? Singers? Okay. Meditators? Levitators? They're all a couple. So, just to get that feeling of community that Todd was talking about, let's start by singing just three breath words. So one of the things that I did in coming here was to meet with my publisher for the first time, Inner Traditions down in Rochester. And they've had the book for about 3 years. The book just came out end of December, beginning of January. But I've never actually met anyone from the publishing company, never seen their face, never spoken to anybody on the phone. It's all been email. So I stopped off on my way up here, and the publisher's wife asked if I would do sort of a brief impromptu concert for the staff, so I brought my stuff for that. So I thought I would just start the evening and end the evening with a little piece of music for you. I usually sing with 9 other people, so this is a little different, but anyway. So I'd like to start with an invocation that's done before the practice of asana. So, the practice of Hatha Yoga. I'm going to read you a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about it, and then if anybody has any questions. So let me just begin at the beginning. What is Hatha Yoga? One who desires true union of yoga should leave all thinking behind and concentrate with single-pointed attention on the nada. And that's from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. You have lost your way. You were walking down a country road. It started to get foggy. It started to get dark. Now you find yourself walking across open country, unable to see more than a few feet in front of you. What is the right direction? How will you find your way home? As it gets darker, you worry that you're straying farther and farther from your destination. The fear begins to well up inside of you. I'm lost and I'll never get home. Then you remember your home, those who love you waiting there for you. You feel love in your heart. You let it grow. You find you are no longer fearful. You hear a sound in the distance. It's not recognizable, but it's familiar. You move toward it, but it is muted as it echoes through the fog. It is difficult to tell exactly where it's coming from. Uncertain, you continue forward. Dimly at first, out of the darkness, you begin to see a faint, flickering light. As you move toward it, it begins to glow more brightly. It becomes a fixed point of radiant light. As you get closer, you recognize the sound as the voice of someone who loves you and cares about you. They're calling your name. As you move towards them, you realize you can see through the windows of your living room the light of a fire burning warm and bright in the fireplace. You have found your way home to the love of your family and the comfort of a cozy fire. Every day, we try and find our way through the fog of distractions in the world around us. We search for any sound to show us the way, any light that indicates what direction we should take. In Hatha Yoga, the calling voice is the inner sacred sound. The warm, bright fire is the eternal divine light. Together, they show us the way home and our connection to all things, everywhere. Hatha Yoga is the yoga of listening. It is a way to turn inward on a journey that may eventually lead you to enlightenment, but at the very least, Hatha Yoga will fill your daily life with comfort, contentment, and what some call bliss. In Hatha Yoga, sound is more than what is heard through our ears. It is an internal sound that is not perceived by our external sense organs. By focusing our mind on the internal sound, we reunite with our essential self, with the eternal and the infinite. In this reunion, we find bliss in both the body and the mind. Hatha Yoga is ancient. It dates back to the Rig Veda, which is 3.5 centuries old. 3.5 millennia old. Rig Veda is a set of Indian verses in Sanskrit. It is one of the world's oldest religious texts. In it we find the Nada Bindu Upanishads. It teaches meditation on the nada, the inner sound. Much of that text was later incorporated into the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Nada. Nad is a Sanskrit word which means to sound, thunder, roar, howl, or cry. Adding an A at its end makes it nada, which means sound or tone. Nada also means river or stream. If we put these different meanings together, stream and to sound, we have the object of meditation in Hatha Yoga, an internal sound stream. Scientists now tell us the entire universe and everything in it is vibrating. That vibration is the core of what connects and coheres everything. Vibration is sound. Many ancient texts hold this same view. Everything is vibrating, everything is sound. As Hazrat Anyat Khan says in the mysticism of sound and music, that which has created and which is holding and in which is held the whole manifestation and the whole cosmos is one power, and that is vibration. The universal vibration is without beginning or end, reaching infinitely from before the Big Bang into the unending future. Even today, as the planets move through space, they are vibrating. The sun in the sky is vibrating at millions of different frequencies. The gravitational waves emanating from black holes, expanding and contracting space, are vibrations. Vibration is everywhere and permeates and connects everything. This is universal consciousness, vast, pervasive, interconnected, constant. It is that which enlivens everything. As Reverend Carrara put it in his Inside the Yoga Sutras, nada, the first vibration out of which all creation manifests. Sound is the first manifestation of the absolute Brahman. In the same way, each of us is vibrating on many levels. We are vibrating from the subatomic to the cellular level, from the rhythm of our respiration to the pulse of our heart, from the vibrational tension of our muscles to the microelectrical pulses of our nervous system. There is also within us a vibration, an internal sound. This is the nada. Kant also said, each person has his note. That particular note is expressive of his life's evolution, expressive of his soul, of the condition of his feeling, and of his thoughts. For each person, this sound may be different, yet it is all part of the vibration of the universe. We are all part of a sacred sound stream. The nada is constant, ever present. It is always there, both within us and reaching into the greater universe. All we have to do is listen. We seek the stream of sound, patiently waiting for it with joyful anticipation. Once it has arisen in our awareness, it is where we place our attention. This is the practice of Hatha Yoga. We follow the river of sound, which carries us to an ocean of bliss. So much of the book is based on sacred texts. The section on the nada is primarily taken from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. But in earlier texts that were put together by linguists and grammarians who were trying to figure out how speech worked, they came up with the 4 levels of sound. And starting at the highest level of sound, and this is in terms of speech, the highest level of sound is just pure intention, the idea of saying something, just the intention to say it. That's para, that's the highest level. The next level is with speech, is the formulation of an actual idea. So we go from intention to idea. And that's pashyanti. And then madhyama, which means between, is the formation of the speech of the idea in our heads. And then finally, vaikhari, the actual bringing into the world around us the speech, the sound. So we have the intention, we have the idea, the formulation of the idea, we have the speech in our head, and then we have the speech in our environment, bringing it out into the world. So we take that model for Hatha Yoga and sort of turn it on its head. We start with the gross sounds. We start with those sounds around us, those sounds in our environment, which are all of the sounds that we're surrounded by all the time. We don't hear a lot of them because we purposely filter out much of our environmental sounds. And so let's just take, it's very quiet in here, but let's just take a moment and sit quietly and just listen to the subtlest sounds that we can hear in our environment here. Yeah. So what do we hear? What does anybody hear? Yes?
The hum of the lights.
The hum of the lights, yeah, that electrical hum.
I can hear people talking upstairs.
Yes, upstairs. That's.
A hissing sound of silence.
You hear the sound of silence?
Hissing.
Hissing. So, does anybody have tinnitus? Yes, and is that primarily what you hear when you're in the choir?
No,
You don't.
I don't always notice it.
Yeah. So, the premise of the book basically is, I mean, were we able to really just concentrate on the sound around us? So the premise of the book is, that runs throughout, is if we're listening, then we can't be talking. Just like when you have a good conversation, if you're listening to the person, you're not talking at the same time. So if we are listening, then we can't be talking even inside of our heads. So over the course of the book, we try and encourage and practice a kind of focused listening. It's the kind of listening you do when you're waiting for someone to arrive, maybe someone you haven't seen for a while, and you're joyfully anticipating the arrival. And depending on where you are, you may hear some sound, tires on a driveway, or if you're in a building, maybe the elevator or someone walking down the hall. And in that instant, we stop thinking, and we totally focus our listening to hear, is that them? And just really listen. So the idea is to take that kind of focused listening and extend the time periods that we can stay in it. Because the longer we're listening, the longer we're in that focused listening, the longer we're not talking to ourselves, the longer that internal dialogue is quieting down. So we start in the inverse of the linguistic model: intention, idea, formulation of internal language, expression of language. We go up instead. So we try and focus our listening both externally, and then the second level is internally, which are the sounds of the mind, which have encompass both those sound memories that we have, that sound of a particular sort from our childhood that brings up a memory, or maybe perhaps a song that when we hear it brings back a whole sensory experience for us, or the voice of someone who was important to us. We store all of these memories. We have them. We carry them around with us all the time. And so the ability to then be able to focus on both those kind, and also the sounds of the mind of the internal dialogue. And whose voice is that? And, you know, is there only one voice, or, you know, and when we're scolding ourselves, is it a different voice than when we're happily celebrating something? And so therefore, the madhyama, the middle sound, are the sounds of the mind. Then the third level, pashyanti, are visual sounds. And how can there be a visual sound? Because we're using our vision to see, we're using our hearing to listen. But if you think about it, for instance, if you're watching a movie and you're watching two people in a room, and then you hear a siren and tires screeching, there's on some level you're knowing, you're hearing, you're perhaps maybe even seeing that police car or fire engine pulling up outside of this off screen. So we often overlap both the visual and the auditory. Sometimes the auditory leads to the visual, sometimes the visual leads to the auditory. So that's the third level. And then the fourth, which is the section that's really based on the teachings of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, have to do with the internal sacred sound. And there are 10 or 12 sounds that are described. Some of them are, I think, actually the sound of our body that we tend to filter out. And but there are these other sounds that when we focus on them, as we focus in various other kinds of meditation, on our breath, or on a flower, or a candle flame, or whatever particular thing is arising in our mind, it's just another point of focus for meditation. And scientists will tell you, oh, well, you know, you're stopping up your ears, so this is just a sensory deprivation hallucination. And in fact, it may be that. But nonetheless, there's something very powerful about fixing your attention on this particular sound that immediately helps you sink into deeper and deeper levels of consciousness. And initially, of course, we live in a very distracting world. And we've trained ourselves with screens and to be jumping from thought to thought. And so initially, I'm sure as all of you who have meditation practices have gone through the process of what's outlined in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the last 3 steps, which are our first concentration on the particular object of our meditation. And that happens with varying degrees of success. We find ourselves concentrating, and then we're thinking about the meal we're going to have, or something we saw, and then we bring our attention back. And we train the mind to keep coming back, to keep coming back, to keep coming back. And then we go from concentration to meditation, which is this unbroken cycle of single-pointed attention to the object of our meditation. In this case, it's the sound. And when that happens, the internal dialogue tends to kind of fall away. And you know, it's something that happens through practice over a period of time with diligence. And but with Hatha Yoga, I mean, I've been doing yoga since 1988 and worked on different forms of meditation. I was always sort of, constantly sort of distracted, and it never really engaged for me. I never really got to the point where I was engaged. But this for me has been, I'm a very auditory person. I've been a musician for more than 50 years. And I'm a very auditory person. And this for me, this form of meditation, somehow engaged me on a level of attention that I hadn't been able to find before. And that's basically why I wrote the book. I had been to many teachers who taught Hatha Yoga, and often it was based in North Indian classical rag. And that particular form of Hatha Yoga is a worthwhile and really good form of practice. But it wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for something deeper, more internal. And so I was reading the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and I came to halfway through the 4th chapter where it says, now here begins the teaching of Hatha Yoga, taught by Gorokhana, who was a sage in the 12th century, who traveled throughout India and neighboring countries, and as many of the people who wrote texts, collated information about yogic practices. And then later, when Swatmarama wrote the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or really didn't write it, again, collated it, he drew on these teachings from Gorokhana. So I started doing the practices and went to consult with a very senior Hatha Yoga teacher who I had studied with, and he read through the practice with me. And really, it was a process of discovery. I'm no high teacher. I'm just a guy. I'm just a musician who's interested in sound and was engaged by this practice, doing the practice, questions arising, going back to the text, going back to the practice, sitting, having more questions, broadening my search into many of the sacred texts. And there are translations of those in the back of the book, all the texts. Anything that I could find basically from the older and Vedic texts of India that dealt with sound and sound meditation, I included. So for me, there's something about this practice that is very engaging. That's very that I found it quite easy to be engaged by it and go into levels deep of consciousness deeper than I ever thought I would achieve, and it's due to the practice as it's laid out. So basically, listening both to the sounds around us, then listening to the sounds of the mind, and then finding this connection between the visual and the auditory, and then having developed the skill of being able to really lengthen. It's kind of like for you cyclists, it's kind of like that moment of silence and meditation. It's kind of like getting in there behind someone else and just kind of drafting off that moment of silence and just staying in it as long as you can. And over time, as many of you I'm sure know who have meditation practice, it becomes more refined, it becomes more subtle. And that's another aspect of the practice. We're always looking for the most subtle aspect of the sound. So the gross sounds around us, the sounds of the mind, visual sounds, and then the nada. And the nada is, we're always listening for the most subtle aspect of the sound within the sound behind the sound above the sound. And there's an expression in Vedanta, which is the more subtle something is, the more pervasive it is. And the more pervasive it is, the more subtle it is. And the sound is there, it's always around us. We're vibrating, everything around us is vibrating. It's really just a matter of drawing our attention to it. And by doing so, stilling the inner dialogue, quieting things down. So does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Yeah, you were talking about those points.
Yes.
And let's see, I missed the third point. You said it was pashyanti.
Yes. Were you talking about the down or the up? The linguistic model or the Hatha Yoga model?
No, I missed this in my notes. I was wondering what was between the idea of what to say and then bringing the sound or speech out.
Yes, well, the formation of the idea, okay.
Yeah.
This person, I could help them. Then how could I help them? Okay, I could say, if you go down 2 blocks and take a left, so that's what I formulated in my mind first, and then I actually speak. It happens instantaneously, really awfully quickly, very quickly, awfully quickly.
So would the pashyanti then be the refining of the idea?
Well, it's more, for those of us, especially who are auditories, it's really more of the formulation of the actual words.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
The beginning of learning of language,
Yes.
is that,
Well, you know, it's very interesting because I talk about that a little bit in the book. There's an exercise. The chapters are all set up in short, usually a story or an example, and then there's the chapters are fairly short in length so people can get through them. An example or a story, and then some explanation, and then there's usually a short exercise or meditation to do. And one of them deals with exactly what we're talking about. When a child is developing, before it understands language, it understands the sound of voice, the mother cooing, speaking sometimes, baby syllables. And that's what the primary response is to that feeling that's conveyed through the sound. And then at some point, when the parents are speaking language to the child in its development realizes that there are other meanings that are attached, and then start repeating words back and copying what the parents do. And what's so interesting as adults, we often lose touch with the sound of speech. And there's an exercise when I do workshops where we speak without language in order to put people's attention, we break up into groups and people do this, in order to bring people's attention to the sound of language. Because you can often tell more about what someone's feeling, what their internal state is, by the sound that they're making. You can understand more what's going on with them than the content of what they're saying. And so we intuitively, I think we get that. Intuitively, we respond to the sound of language. But if you can sometimes just step back from the content and listen to someone say what they're saying, it's very revealing about what's going on with them. And you can do it if you're in a movie theater before the movie starts, or a theater, or at an art opening. If you just stop and listen to all the people talking at once, and don't hear it as language, just listen to it as a sound. And it is this marvelous interweaving of voices where you're not really listening to the content, you're just listening to the sound. And this is one of the things we try and develop in the book, is this ability to hear sound without naming, without giving it form or name, just to hear it as pure sound. And so we do all of these things on all 4 levels. So I don't know if I've really answered your question.
Well, I didn't really formulate it as a question. I just said, the formation of language. But
Yes.
I guess if I put it as a question, there's a saying, say what you mean what you say.
Yes.
And authenticity in speech.
Yes.
That there's one way of it, they say that if you receive the mantra,
Yes.
which is supposed to be what it sounds like,
Yes.
so it's like onomatopoeia,
Yes.
that if you just recite that,
Yes.
you'll realize what it means if
Yes.
you listen openly.
Yes.
But if you receive that from somebody who has not realized the mantra,
Right.
the odds of your realizing it are less.
I think that's probably true. Yes.
So then it's listening to somebody else speak authentically
Yes.
that allows you to speak authentically.
Yes.
Sounds like
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. How about this question about, they say God is his name.
Well, in Sanskrit, the feeling is that actually even whatever sounds you're making are the sound of whatever it is that you're making.
So if you say
Yes.
Krishna,
Yeah.
that's
I had a very interesting experience when I was recording. We were singing the final cut on the last album that we put out, and at the end it goes Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, repeated over and over again. And there was one problem with one of the singers, and so I was, with digital recording, you can scroll back and forth over the sound. And going forward, it said Shanti. Going backwards, it said Krishna. Yeah.
It's like those hidden things. That
Well, it's like it's like the Beatles, the George Paul was dead. But I would bet that there are people who can hear things backwards and forwards, who can do exactly what digitally sweeping over the sound, they can do it in their mind. And I have no doubt somewhere way back when, Krishna and they came up with Shanti, which means, of course, peace. So the connection for me makes perfect sense. Any questions? Any answers? Should I read a little more?
Could you just talk a little bit more about visual sound? I don't really
Yes.
understand that.
It's something that actually comes rather easily to me because I'm what's called a synesthete. I have synesthesia.
Yeah.
I actually see sounds. And as a composer and arranger, I actually place things in a visual landscape in terms of pitch. If they're higher in the landscape. If they're sustained, they tend to be long lines. If they're percussive, they tend to be sort of angular shards. And so basically, I was born with it, and it turns out many artists, many people involved with the arts, there's a high incidence of synesthesia. But I also believe it's something that we can learn to do. Basically, people who have synesthesia, it's because when the brain is forming, there are many neural pathways that get compartmentalized as the brain develops. And in synesthetes, it seems as if there are areas where the compartmentalization doesn't happen as completely. So you get a kind of leakage between adjacent portions of the brain that deal with different senses. But if the neural pathways were once there, then it's possible to learn these things again. I mean, with the amount of research that's going on now with brain development, and they now have discovered, in terms of the big buzzword is neuroplasticity, that not only do we form new neural pathways as long as we're alive, but we also grow gray matter in the parts of the brain that we're exercising. So people who are multilingual have developed that part of the brain. People who are athletic have developed more kinesthetic eye touch contact, and they did research at Harvard where they had people meditate. They taught people to meditate and had them do it for 2 months, and they did the RMI or brain photographs at the beginning of the process and at the end. And those people who were not in the control group, who were in the group who were doing it, actually developed thicker gray matter in those 4 portions of the brain that are involved with meditation. And also, as we get older, there tends to be a thinning of gray matter, and they also did research with long-time meditators and found that it tended to slow that process down. So neuroplasticity, reforming those or forming new neural pathways that allow us to combine these two senses through practice, I feel can be done. Anybody else have synesthesia? Yes? Both of you? Huh. What kind do you have?
Taste and listening.
Taste and listening.
And also words for me, I taste them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when I hear things, I taste it, and when I speak things, I actually taste words.
Huh. Interesting. And you?
Sight and sound.
Sight and sound, same. And how does that, how do you see sounds? How do you?
I see all the patterns become fractal according to music. Whatever they move according to music.
The most common forms of synesthesia are seeing letters or numbers as specific colors. And also, many composers as well tend to see keys, like D major, or specific notes as having a particular color. And I think Stravinsky, Jimi Hendrix, well, that may be chemically induced, but there are many composers who are synesthetes, who have the combination of those two senses.
But the word you mentioned earlier, tonitis or something?
Tinnitus, yes. I have it.
What is it?
From playing in many very loud rock bands when I was younger and a little more adventurous. And in one band I had a drummer who had a cymbal right by my head, so he would. So it's a ringing in the ears, basically. And my approach to it is, and this sounds like maybe it's similar to you, is you can't fight it. There's no fighting it. You have to acknowledge it, make friends with it, and focus your concentration in such a way that you're just not noticing it. Now, doctors will tell you it's incurable and it will get worse as you get older. But I think it was Brahmananda who said, it's a message from God telling you to pay attention to your inner life. So,
I have it too.
So, but it is, in terms of the nada, it is a place where you can begin. You can use it as a starting point. Thank you for coming. It can be a starting point for the meditation, but we're always looking for the subtlest sound. So what happens is it tends to fall away and you focus your attention elsewhere. Are we done? Let me sing one more piece for you. This is based on a Hawaiian chant, which is a reconciliation chant. That when tribes or families were having a dispute, they would come together and they would chant this. And the chant actually is Hopo Opono Opono. And not literally, but the essence of it is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. And my wife and I use it a lot. For Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'll be upstairs if anybody wants a book. I would be glad to sign it for you. And Yoga Vermont tomorrow will be doing the exercises, all 4 levels, and sending you away with a complete picture of what the practice is. So, if you'd like to come.
Thank you.